So this is an unfinished presentation. It's not because I didn't quite know how to use PowerPoint, but it's more because there isn't really an answer to this problem that I was looking at. Like, how do you create jobs, or how do you, grow your region when it comes to the game industry? And I have tried to dig out some data. I'm not done. What I'd really like to have one of these days, from someone like maybe Nick here, is like this real-time picture of the world, that shows all the jobs, the companies, and revenues in the game industry, in a visualization map of the world in real time, right? But nobody really has that, and as far as I've been able to dig and just look for this data, it doesn't really exist. And if somebody does it, maybe they collect it once a year or once every 5 years on a particular country, maybe. But it's hard to find. So I gave a series of talks in Japan about this as well. And we're going to do some more sort of updating along the way. On the third bullet point here, we have our GameSpeed Summit in May in Berkeley, and our GameSpeed 2017 conference in October. This is one of the topics we'll go into. We'll also go into this sort of inspiration cycle between science fiction, technology, and games. And that cycle, to me, is one of the explanations for how and why you can create games in a particular region. Like, Silicon Valley has all of those things, and it's helped. Los Angeles has those in the form of Hollywood as well. So those are models to follow. So those are my conferences. That's what I do. So I've been lucky enough to travel around the world. This is my 4th trip to Berlin, it's taught me that when it comes to jobs in the game industry and designing great games, that the world is flat. And I stole that line from Thomas Friedman, the New York Times columnist who wrote "The World is Flat," and he really also traveled the world to figure out that the internet, computing technology, phones have all equalized the playing field for competition, and any new technology can be created pretty much anywhere now. So that's one of the places I went. That's me doing research for this particular speech, right? The Last of Us is my favorite game of all time, and I think it could only have been made in Los Angeles, right? So, but you can make a game anywhere, and these two Siberian brothers I met at Casual Connect Tel Aviv, and they grew up in the cold in Siberia, and they couldn't go outside to play, so they played indoors, and naturally they gravitated to video games, and they taught themselves how to make video games. And by the 15th game, their company Mytona had a hit, and this hidden object game had more than 30 million downloads. So they had, after that, they had 100 people working for them in Siberia. So that shows that mobile, when mobile came along, it really did equalize the playing field. Before that, PC gaming and console gaming were very concentrated in, other parts of the world. So there's some lessons there. But again, these regions keep coming back as the strongest in a lot of ways across all of the industry. So, can you duplicate it? Can you grow this from scratch? I don't know. Japan still has, hundreds of these arcades spread around their cities, and the U.S. doesn't have arcades anymore. So the Japanese can use these arcades as experimental locations for new technology and new games, and virtual reality experiences are debuting in these arcades that are already in place. In the U.S., they're just sort of talking about maybe we should bring arcades back. Maybe it was a bad idea to lose them after a while. And it is interesting to me that Atari and the first games came out of a region that had decades of computing platform experience behind it. So Atari was born in Silicon Valley, and I think that was no accident. But each one of these events listed here is really like a beginning point in time for a whole regional economy built around games. It wasn't Nokia that really gave birth to Helsinki's mobile game industry. It was really the demo scene hacker group that started quite a long time before. So it's very interesting. And if your region's not here, then that means you've had less time to develop your game industry. So if you have like a Chamber of Commerce sort of person, or regional development people who want to attract game companies into your region, this is the kind of slide that you would have, right? This is how you can make good things happen. Stanford University, Silicon Valley wouldn't have been there without Stanford from the very start. And it is very instructive to follow like some history here, like Silicon Valley beat out Boston as the place where Silicon Valley would be. Boston was very good at making mini computers. It was a vertically integrated computing town. And then when the PC came along, it became a horizontal industry where Microsoft made the operating system, and Intel made the processors. PC companies like Compaq, they made the hardware, and other companies made applications. And that proved to be a very flexible system, a very flexible ecosystem. Businesses could move a lot faster in that kind of environment. And so Boston lost and Silicon Valley won. Annalee Saxenian wrote this book, Regional Advantage, that captured this story. And it was interesting. It was a platform change that caused one region to die and one region to rise. And so the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, is strong in games not only because there are a tradition of game makers there, because the platform owners are there. So Oculus, Facebook, Google, Apple, Intel, Microsoft is not far away, up in Seattle. So that helps explain why the region is strong. And there's a lot of game jobs in those companies, but they don't really get counted as game jobs, right? Here's how the world looks as far as just where global sales are. It's worth noting that China, of course, is the biggest market for games now. We had some speakers earlier who noted that mobile games, are the biggest part of the industry now. SuperData's data is $40 billion. So SuperData created this slide for me, so I was happy about that. And I had no clue, just how many companies there are, but this is brand new data from them. So 2,900 in the US, 472 in Canada, 350 Argentina, 888 in Brazil. And so these numbers mean something, but they also don't mean something in other ways, right? So the ESA had some data that they published some years back. I don't think they've refreshed this yet. They're the trade group for the United States game industry. They counted 1,600 companies a few years ago and 150,000 jobs directly related to games. We'll see if that data holds true. Here's the SuperData data for Asia. So it's kind of stunning to know that 6,111 game companies are in China. And I thought it was my imagination, or I was just really ill-informed. But when I went to China, and I went to the China Joy show, I would talk to these game companies, and so I'd ask them, like, how many employees do you have? And they say 1,000. I go, oh, I've actually never heard of your game company before. And I don't know how many of these companies have that many employees, but yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if it's a lot. the numbers kind of lie there because Japan is so strong when it comes to game companies. If you want any company in your region, you want Sony to be in your region, or you want Nintendo, right? So the data for France is kind of interesting in that France has something like 30,000 jobs in the game industry, and it's a smaller number of companies than you would expect. But of course, Ubisoft is there, and they have thousands or tens of thousands of employees. Actually, not tens of thousands. Sorry, a total of 10,000 employees across the whole company. Right. So Ubisoft really helps France push upward in the number of game jobs, but not it's just one company. Right. So this is also brand new data from a job posting company called Indeed.com. And so a little while back, they produced like an interesting data point about the US. And in 2014, let's see, so since 2014, the number of job postings for games in the US has gone down 65%, right? According to every single posting counted by this jobs company. So I asked them to do a map of the world when it comes to job postings around the world. And they actually crunched all the data, and this is what they came up with. And so South Korea has the most jobs posted in the game industry now. And the US is at number 10. So that immediately makes me think, what is going wrong in the US, right? Where are the US's jobs going when it comes to the game industry? Spain is very high. Canada, I think Canada is very high, and so high that its strategy as a companion region to the US is actually working out really well. So you could have your headquarters in the US, but since it's so expensive to hire developers in the US, maybe you should set up shop in Canada instead, where you can hire 2 engineers for the price of 1 in Silicon Valley. And I heard from our AI reporter, there's about 1,500 startups in artificial intelligence right now. Those suck a lot of jobs out of the game companies that are in Silicon Valley. And some of the AI engineers in Silicon Valley are getting salaries of $1 million a year. I thought that was crazy. It is crazy, and it's like the hottest new thing. And so even though AI is so old, the presence of competing industries next to the game industry makes the game industry look really bad in the US, and it can suck jobs out of the game industry because there's something better down the street. This was another interesting chart that Indeed.com created, where the number 1 city in the world where you guys should all move right now is Seongnam in South Korea. Right? They have the most jobs posted out of any city in the world. And again, look at where San Francisco is, number 13 on the list. Bellevue, Washington has more jobs open than Silicon Valley, basically. So very interesting, but this is, again, it makes me ask more questions, like why does this exist? And I would ask the whole game industry to help us figure out what the answers are here, what this means. And this was just eye-opening to see who the largest public game companies are. And this was from Newzoo. They did this in 2014. Tencent from China, largest game company in the world, right? And this is what I like about the game business. Everything is weird and unpredictable here. Supercell with 200 employees, I guess it's 250 now, valued at $10 billion based on a real transaction, is worth more than Ubisoft, which is valued at $3.7 billion with 10,000 employees, right? Ubisoft, maybe they're not as labor efficient as maybe they would hope, I guess, or capital efficient, whatever. Here's how the rankings changed in 2015. You'll notice that a lot of the strongest leaders of the game industry are the platform owners as well, right? But Mixi got on the list on the strength of a single mobile game, right? And first half of 2016, a little bit of change, not much. I've already talked a bit about Japan. I think I'll speed through this. Canada, again, sucked a lot of, 20,000 jobs. They have a fifth of the population of the US, and they have a fairly large percentage of game jobs in that region. So very interesting growth. And as I mentioned before, if there's a reason to change the order of things in the world, then new platforms are the way to do it. To maybe invest heavily, to dive into these new regions, new platforms of the game industry. It's a way to create new jobs. China, I mentioned, is strong, but ultimately you run into the problem of government censorship. And it's not necessarily the best place in the world for creative professionals to be, right? Israel, very interesting history, started from online gambling, and that expertise served them very well in the rise of social casino games. Playtika, grew to well over 1,000 employees in Israel, and then it was acquired by a Chinese company for $4 billion, right? So M&A activity can actually have a very big effect on, what happens to your region and where the strength of the game economy is. If somebody acquires it who belongs to another region, they have different interests at heart than keeping jobs in your city or your country, right? Here's some of the data on Europe. Spain was very interesting in that, Spain has 480 companies, and 85% of those companies did not exist 10 years ago. And with that sort of number of companies, it's not a surprise that they just, say recently had a big exit with Social Points getting acquired by Take-Two Interactive for $250 million plus. Right? Sorry, that's a typo in France. It's a lot more employees than that. I think this slide just really points out that things can change. In Israel and Ukraine, we found out that geopolitics can matter. Like when the countries go to war, that's not good for the game industry, right? It's like your basic civilization game. If you go to war in civilization, it's not good for your empire, right? Austin had sort of a vulnerability in being especially susceptible to the MMO industry. And they had lots of the MMO companies. And when MMOs sort of got killed off by World of Warcraft, then all those Austin companies disappeared. Yeah, the immigration policy in the U.S., it's not going to be an advantage for the next 4 years, right? I know that Canada is strategizing very good right now about how to take advantage of Donald Trump. And, who knows, they're probably going to have a lot of success. But yeah, your game industry should welcome games. So much of government's obsession has been about violence in games, or how to regulate games or keep them out of the hands of children. There's some regions where people grow up playing games, and some regions where they don't. Like India did not have a history of people growing up playing games, and they're not as far up the food chain in the game industry. And I think that idea of a food chain is really appropriate for how countries or regions can strategize about how to grow in the future, how to move up. You can start with game testing at the very bottom, and at the top of the food chain, I guess, is Grand Theft Auto or something like that. I don't know. What's coming next? I do think AI is moving along so fast that it's going to create lots of impacts for the game industry. And the proximity of all those AI people to Silicon Valley, that's going to turn into an advantage. It's an advantage for Canada as well again. So these are things that are kind of coming in the future. So when I was counting companies, the map of the world might look like something like that. And it is interesting, and also here's some new regions, like it was interesting in this research to find that, Iran has 150 game companies with 2,500 developers. Lithuania has 30 companies with, actually, I think 200 employees, not 400. I would love for somebody to go around and count all of this so I don't have to do all this work myself. But, if you visualize this as a map, you think of your favorite characters in the game industry and you put them on the globe and you stuck them in the places where they were created, then this is, I think, what really matters. And you have to create lasting franchises that last for generations. It's sort of like, Disney, for example, Mario. When you create something like that, of course, it lasts a long time. It has a lasting effect. It lasts for generations. It creates thousands of jobs. And that's what you ultimately want to get to. So, Los Angeles it's not bad, right? It's got a pretty good share of all of the great franchises of the gaming world. So, maybe if somebody then, say, took this and counted all the revenues generated by each one of those games, then you'd have an interesting answer as well as to, who's got the strongest game industry. There's all kinds of ways to create a scorecard, that could make your region look good. Here's more of the same. Couldn't fit it all on one slide. But yeah, Moscow and Honolulu, who would have thought? Tetris, right? Well, there's things you can do to, help your region, and, I won't get into that too much. But that's what I've got. Like I said, it's not really done, but it's an interesting question to ask. It's like, where are the games now? Where are the game jobs? Where are they going to be? And I think that, you can't just think about building a company. You have to think of your whole region. And when you think of your region, you can't just count the number of jobs or the number of game companies. You have to look at whether you've got franchises that are in the making that are going to last for generations. Cost isn't the only advantage. And you can, create a hub that includes a lot more than just games. Silicon Valley, again, has tech and everything else. Los Angeles has Hollywood and entertainment, right? All those things are important to games. Government support would be wonderful. It doesn't really exist in the United States. Maybe that explains why the number of jobs in the US is going down, because there is no strategy the country has to hang on to its jobs. And to take it for granted for any region is really, would be a shame. But if you start doing some of these things, then your region can help games take over the world. So that's my conclusion so far. Thank you.
That was a great presentation. That some really interesting topics. One of the points on I think it was the third slide back, you mentioned new regions. I think one further back than that, was it? There. So perhaps you could share with us if there's any issues or constraints as to launching in those new regions. In particular, I know that there's still sanctions in Iran. Is that something you may have come across before, or have got some solution for us on that one?
Yeah, I don't know that much about Iran. I mean, like, the sanctions were lifted like maybe a year ago, but with Donald Trump in office now, they may go back into effect. So that's probably what he wants. But that is just the number of game companies inside Iran that are selling games inside Iran, but also in the rest of the Middle East. And that's a 400 million person market. That's a pretty big opportunity that's been overlooked for quite a long time. I'm not sure how other regions penetrate into the Middle East, but the Middle East should grow more of its own to serve the population that's clearly a gaming population.
Thank you very much. If anybody has any interest in asking Dean any more questions, please do so here on the side. And please, once again, give him a warm round of applause.
Thank you.